You are listening to the 45th broadcast of TBR Radios, the TBR History Hour, with your host, TBR contributing editor, Dr. Edward DeVries. On today's show, as perhaps the greatest political hoax in American history is being perpetrated upon the American people, Dr. Ed pays tribute to the wit and wisdom of political humorist, and do-nothing politician, Will Rogers.
An ignorant person is one who doesn't know what you have just found out. An onion can make people cry, but there has never been a vegetable invented to make them laugh. Ancient Rome declined because it had a Senate. Now what's going to happen to us with both a Senate and a House? Be thankful. We're not getting all the government we're paying for. Diplomacy is the art of saying nice doggy until you can't find the rock. Don't gamble. Take all your savings and buy some good stock and hold it till it goes up, then sell it. If it don't go up, don't buy it. Even if you're on the right track, you'll get run over if you just sit there. I belong to no organized party. I'm a Democrat. I never expected to see the day when girls would get sunburned in the places they do today. I was not a child prodigy, because a child prodigy is a child who knows as much when it is a child as it does when it grows up. I'm not a real movie star. I've still got the same wife I started out with 28 years ago. Live in such a way that you would not be ashamed to sell your parrot to the town gossip. Nothing you can't spell will ever work. On account of being a democracy and run by the people, we are the only nation in the world that has to keep a government for years, no matter what it does. Our Constitution protects aliens, drunks, and U.S. senators. Politics is applesauce. Take the diplomacy out of the war and the thing would fall flat in a week. The best doctor in the world is the veterinarian. He can't ask his patients what is the matter. He's got to just know. The movies are the only business where you can go out front and applaud yourself. The only time people dislike gossip is when you gossip about them. There ought to be one day, just one, when there is open season on senators. There's no trick to being a humorist when you have the whole government working for you. This country has come to feel the same when Congress is in session as when the baby gets hold of a hammer. We are all here for a spell. Get all the good laughs you can. We can't all be heroes because somebody has to sit on the curb and clasp as they go by. We don't know what we want, but we are ready to bite somebody to get it. Rumor travels faster, but it don't stay put as long as truth. There is only one thing that can kill the movies, and that is education. The more you read and observe about this politics thing, you got to admit that each party is worse than the other. The income tax has made more liars out of the American people than golf has. Everything is funny as long as it's happening to somebody else. You know everybody is ignorant, only on different subjects. Half our life is spent trying to find something to do with the time we have rushed. You can't say that civilization don't advance, however, for in every war they kill you in a new way. Well, all I know is what I read in the papers. Heroing is one of the shortest-lived professions there is. I don't make jokes, I just watch the government and report the facts. I bet if you had met him, Trotsky, and had a chat with him, I would have found him a very interesting and human fella, for I never yet met a man that I didn't like. See what will happen if you don't stop biting your fingernails. Communism is like prohibition. It's a good idea, but it won't work. I see a good deal of talk from Washington about lowering taxes. I hope they do get them lowered enough so people can afford to pay them. And that was just a small sampling of the wit and wisdom of Will Rogers. As I'm watching the returns pouring in fact, there was 138,000 vote dump in Michigan early this morning. I'm recording this on Wednesday. And so there was 138,000 votes dumped onto Michigan this morning. All 138,000 were for Joe Biden. Not a single vote was for Donald Trump. It just so happens that when we went to bed last night, that Donald Trump was ahead by a little fewer than 138,000 votes in the state of Michigan. So we're literally watching an election being stolen. We're watching our country being ripped out from under us. And it reminds me that there was a gentler time in America. There was a saner time in America. There was a time in America when there were people like Will Rogers, as opposed to the Bill Maher's and the Stephen Colbert's, and just the idiots that you see on CNN and MSNBC and even Fox News today. And as I was watching the returns last night and as I woke up this morning, I thought to myself, oh, if only. If only. And I was watching Bill Maher the other day, and again, I was thinking, if only Will Rogers were still here. And so today's show is going to be a tribute to Will Rogers. Who was Will Rogers? What did he become famous for? Will Rogers was born in 1879 in Indian Territory near present-day Oologah, Oklahoma. His parents were both part Cherokee. He was the youngest of 8 children, but only 3 of his siblings survived into adulthood. In 1901, Rogers heard that there was money to be made in Argentina, so he and a friend headed out in search of their fortunes. When they arrived in Argentina, they discovered that the money they dreamed of was a myth. So his friend went back to Oklahoma, but Will stayed. From there, he got a job on a boat that was headed to South Africa. In South Africa, he went to work on a ranch and was eventually hired by Texas Jack's Wild West show. He appeared in the shows as the Cherokee Kid and became famous for performing rope tricks. He toured South Africa with the Wild West show until he was hired by a circus that took him to Australia and New Zealand. In 1904, he returned to the United States and started performing vaudeville acts in New York City. Vaudeville was a form of variety show which usually featured singers, dancers, jugglers, comedians, and other performers. Rogers performed his tricks and told jokes to the audience as he twirled his rope. The sophisticated New York audiences loved Will's country accent. He also had a natural sense of humor that crowds appreciated. Rogers would often open each show by saying, "All I know is what I read in the newspapers." He would then joke about current events and poke fun at political figures of the era. By 1916, he was the star of the biggest show in New York City, the Ziegfeld Follies. He also began acting in silent films, which only increased his celebrity status. In his films, he sometimes portrayed cowboys, or perhaps comedic characters similar to himself. He continued acting in films up through 1935, eventually starring in over 50 movies. Rogers also started writing weekly newspaper columns in 1926. He would write over 5,000 of them that were syndicated in newspapers all over the world. Additionally, he hosted a weekly radio program in which he told jokes and discussed many different issues that were relevant to people of that time period. One of Will's favorite topics was the advancement of commercial aviation. He believed that airplanes were the future of travel, and he spoke about the subject frequently. He flew to every destination he could in an effort to prove how safe traveling by plane could be. It was his love of aviation which eventually caused his death. In 1935, he embarked on a journey with his good friend Wiley Post, a pilot who had become famous for flying around the world. The two were attempting to fly over the Bering Strait from Alaska to Russia. Many believed that they were on a secret mission from the government, but somewhere over Alaska their motor stalled and the plane crashed, killing both men. Will Rogers' death was mourned by the entire nation. Kings and presidents from foreign nations expressed their regrets at his passing. Today, Will Rogers is remembered as an American legend. Buildings, streets, and even an airport have been named in his honor. There is also a statue of him standing in the U.S. Capitol building. And praise the Lord, I can stop reading the teleprompter because it's time now for a commercial break from our friends over at the Barnes Review. I'll be back with you in 45 seconds.
Open your web browser and type in www.barnesreview.org and discover the Barnes Review magazine. In the Barnes Review, you will read vignettes of man, from the prehistoric to the very recent, from forgotten races and civilizations to first-person accounts of World War II and the late Cold War. There is no more interesting magazine published today, nor a more significant and important subject than real history. So visit www.barnesreview.org and subscribe to the Barnes Review. You can subscribe to receive the Barnes Review magazine in its print form, or in convenient electronic delivery. Our host has been a subscriber to both formats for years. So visit www.barnesreview.org and subscribe to the Barnes Review.
Radio allowed the words of Will Rogers to reach the largest, most diverse live audience he ever entertained. In October 1931, in the midst of the Great Depression, he spoke on a nationwide broadcast for President Hoover's Organization of Unemployment Relief and delivered what became famously known as his Bacons and Beans and Limousines speech. His remarks that evening and his other frequent radio appearances in the 1930s lightened his listeners' hearts and gave them hope during desperate times.
Don't get scared and start turning off your radios. I'm not advertising or trying to sell you anything. If the mouthwash you're using is not the right kind and it tastes sort of like sheep dip, why, you just have to go right on using it. I can't advise any other kind at all. And if the cigarettes that you're using, why, if they don't lower your Adam's apple, why, I don't know of any that would. You just have to cut out apples, I guess. That's the only thing I know. Now, Mr. Owen Young asked me to annoy on this program this evening. You all know Mr. Owen B. Young. You know, he's the only sole surviving wealthy Democrat. So naturally, when a wealthy Democrat asked me to do anything, I had to do it. See, well, Mr. Young, he's head of the Young Plan. You know, he's the originator of the Young Financial European Plan. He's the head of Young Men's Temperance Union and originator of Young's Market and Young Kipper. And they was the first Democratic child born of white parents in Youngstown, Ohio. He started the Young Plan in Europe. That was that every nation pay just according to what they could afford to pay, see? And, well, somebody else come along with an older plan than Young's plan, and it was that nobody don't pay anybody anything. And, of course, that's the oldest plan there is. And that's the one they're working under now. That's why we ain't getting anything from Europe. So when Mr. Young asked me to appear, why, I said, well, I'm kind of particular. I said, who's going to be the other speaker? Who else is on the bill with me? And he said, well, how would Mr. Hoover do? Well, I slightly heard of him, you know, and I said, well, I'll think it over. So I looked into Mr. Hoover's record and inquired of everybody. And after I had kind of thrown out about 2/3 of what Democrats said about him, why, I figured that I wouldn't have much to lose by appearing with Mr. Hoover. So I'm here this evening appearing on the bill with Mr. Hoover. So now I expect you won't hear any more of Amos and Andy. It'll just be Hoover and Rogers from now on. Now we're reading the papers every day, and they get us all excited over the one or a dozen different problems that's supposed to be before this country. There's not really but one problem before the whole country at this time. It's not the balancing of Mr. Mellon's budget. That's his worry. That ain't ours. And it's not the League of Nations that we read so much about, or it's not the silver question. The only problem that confronts this country today is that at least 7 million people are out of work. That's our only problem. There is no other one before us at all. It's to see that every man that wants to, able to work, is allowed to find a place to go to work, and also to arrange some way of getting a more equal distribution of the wealth in the country. Now, it's prohibition. We hear a lot about that. Well, that's nothing to compare to your neighbor's children that are hungry. It's food. It ain't drink that we're worried about today. Here a few years ago, we were so afraid that the poor people was liable to take a drink that now we've fixed so they can't even get something to eat. So here we are in a country with more wheat and more corn and more money in the bank and more cotton, more everything in the world. There's not a product that you can name that we haven't got more of it than any country ever had in the face of the earth. And yet we've got people starving. We'll hold the distinction of being the only nation in the history of the world that ever went to the poorhouse in an automobile. The potter's field are lined with granaries full of grain. Now, if there ain't something cockeyed in an arrangement like that, then this microphone here in front of me is, well, it's a cuspidor, that's all. Now, I think that perhaps they'll arrange it. I think our big men will perhaps fix some way of fixing a different distribution of things. If they don't, they're certainly not big men and won't be with us long. That's one thing. Now, I say, and have always claimed, that things would pick up in 32. 32, why 32? Well, because 32 is an election year. See? And the Republicans always see that everything looks good on election year. See? They give us 3 good years and one bad one. No, 3 bad ones and 1 good one. I like they got it wrong. That's the Democrats does. Yeah, they give us three bad years and 1 good one, but the good one always comes on the year that the voting is. See, so the Democrats are always just 1 year late with our elections. See, now if they was running this year, well, they'd be all right, but they're 1 year late. Everything will pick up next year and be fine. These people that you're asked to aid, they're not asking for charity. They're naturally asking for a job. But if you can't give them a job, why, the next best thing you can do is see that they have food and the necessities of life. There's not a one of us that has anything that these people that are without it now haven't contributed to what we've got. I don't suppose there's the most unemployed, the hungriest man in America has contributed in some way to the wealth of every millionaire in America. It wasn't the working class that brought this condition on at all. It was the big boys themselves who thought that this financial drunk we were going through was going to last forever. They over-merged and over-capitalized and over everything else. That's the fix that we're in now. Now, I think that every town and every city will raise this money. In fact, they can't afford not to. They've got the money because there's as much money in the country as there ever was. Only the fewer people have it, but it's there. And I think the towns will all raise it, because I've been on a good many charity affairs all over the country, and I have yet to see a town or a city ever fail to raise the money when they knew the need was there and they saw the necessity. Every one of them will come through. Europe don't like us, and they think we're arrogant and bad manners and have a million faults, but every one of them, they give us credit for being liberal. doggone it, the people are liberal. Our Americans, I don't know about America being fundamentally sound and all that after dinner hooey, but I do know that America is fundamentally liberal. Now, I want to thank Mr. Gifford, the head of this unemployment, thank Mr. Young, and I certainly want to thank Mr. Hoover for the privilege of being allowed to appear on the same program with him, because I know that this subject is very dear to Mr. Hoover's heart. I know that he'd rather see the problem of unemployment solved than he would to see all the other problems he has before him combined. And if every town and every city will get out and raise their quota and what they need for this winter, why, it'll make him a very happy man. And happiness hasn't been a steady diet with our president. He's had a very tough, uphill fight, and this will make him feel very good. And he's a very human man. I thank you. Good night.
And for those of you watching on YouTube, we actually showed some studio film footage there. So you could actually see Will Rogers in action. For those of you listening on the radio, of course, you didn't get that privilege. Anyways, we're about to break for a commercial from our friends over at the American Free Press. During this commercial, if you just happen to be watching on YouTube, would you please take a moment, click like and subscribe, maybe even give us a thumbs up. All of those things really do help us out here as we promote TBR Radio Presents the TBR History Hour.
Extra, read all about it.
If you're like me, and I'll bet you are, you like to be on the cutting edge of honest news and accurate information. You like to hear about the latest financial trends and to know what's happening around the world and right here in the United States. The things that can directly impact you, your life, and the life of your family. And if you're like me, you do not rely on the mainstream media to obtain this information because, frankly, you know that you just can't trust them. Fortunately, there is an alternative news outlet with a long-established track record for honesty and integrity, and that is the American Free Press. AFP is the preeminent alternative, independent news source for honest, hard-working, truth-loving Americans. AFP is the antithesis of the controlled, lamestream media. AFP is employee-owned and has been so since its founding. Because of that, AFP never has and never will allow advertisers or special interests or big money to dictate what appears in the pages of the American Free Press newspaper. 26 times a year, the American Free Press newspaper can be delivered to your door, packed with the kind of uncensored news that I know you're going to appreciate. AFP covers the stories and tells the truth that the lamestream media is frankly scared to touch. And AFP offers real, on-the-scene reporting and commentary, the likes of which you will never see in the Washington Post, the New York Times, ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, or just about any other lamestream news source that you can think of. That's right, there's only one national populist news weekly staffed by an unsurpassed team of veteran investigative journalists who will dare to rip the veil off of many of the major news stories that are being censored and suppressed by the big money-controlled media monopoly. And that's the American Free Press. AFP publishes exciting, in-depth, uncensored news and information that's grassroots and patriotic, information that Americans need to know in order to combat the growing police state. AFP stands firmly against the New World Order and against those who are working to establish a global plantation under the rule of a powerful few. In short, AFP is your voice. If you have any doubt why they want to silence AFP, you must be relying on the lamestream media for your news, and folks, that's a big mistake. If you're ever dissatisfied with your subscription to the American Free Press, their guarantee is that you just drop them an email and they will gladly refund the unused portion of your subscription. So what are you waiting for? Visit www.americanfreepress.net. Once again, www.americanfreepress.net. And find out about the American Free Press. Do it today.
Extra, extra.
I remember when I was a kid and I would go to the movie theater, and before the feature would play, they would always have cartoon shorts. Well, back in the 1930s, they had newsreel shorts that would play. They also played in the 1940s. And the reason for this was because most people didn't have televisions, and so it wasn't like they could just watch the news at night. And so they would have these newsreel shorts. Of course, during World War II, that's how people got their war news. They would go to the movies, they would watch the shorts. In the 1930s, during the Depression, these newsreel shorts were most people's main source of news and information. And Will Rogers would make these. And one of these that we're about to show here in a moment, and you'll be able to watch it, or for our YouTube viewers, for our radio listeners, you'll be able to hear it. And it is Will Rogers speaking to the Speaker of the House. And it sounds like he's just asking him a bunch of silly questions, but if you'll pay attention, you'll notice that Will Rogers is actually calling the speaker out on a few things, and basically showing how shallow the speaker is, and that here he has this opportunity to address the American people, and he wants to talk about top hats. And so, really, Will Rogers is making a fool of the speaker, but he's doing it so tactfully that nobody even realizes that it's happening, especially the Speaker of the House.
Get him tell me about you got your high hat now.
Oh boy, you ought to see him.
I'd like to see him. Has he got one like that?
You got a high hat. Sure, he's got a high hat.
See, I wear them in the movies just for comedy.
Yeah.
They're all right too. They don't kill you like
I wanted two high hats for the press club when I was there moving pictures.
I sure love seeing you in that high hat.
Oh, I'm a fine dude. Pull it down, you know, and they can't see so much. And I rear back something like this.
Well, sir, thing fixed all up all over in Europe. Now, how you
I
sitting over
got
here?
the thing perfect here. The boys are just eating out of the hand.
the ones that are eating.
Yeah.
The others will eat the hand. Hey, we better quit all that.
And now, for about the next 3 minutes, we're going to listen to a phonograph record recording. Remember the old vinyl, the old 33 1/3? And it's Will Rogers talking to the bankers. You'll have to pay really close attention here because of the nature of this recording, but it'll be worth the effort that you'll make to listen to it.
Loan shark and interest hound. I have addressed every form of organized graft in the United States, excepting Congress. So it's naturally a pleasure to me to appear before the biggest. You are without a doubt the most disgustingly rich audience I ever talked to, with the possible exception of the Bootleggers Union, local number 1, combined with the enforcement officer. Now, I understand you hold this convention every year to announce what the annual GIP will be. I have often wondered where the depositors hold that convention. I had an account in the bank once, and the banker, he asked me to withdraw it. Said I used up more red ink and the account was worth. I see where your wives come with you. You notice I say come, not were brought. I see where your convention was opened by a prayer. You had to send outside your ranks to get somebody that knew how to pray. You should have had one creditor there. He'd shown you how to pray. I noticed in the prayer the clergyman announced to the Almighty that the bankers were here. Well, it wasn't exactly an announcement. It was more in the nature of a warning. He didn't tell the devil, as he figured he knew where you all were all the time anyhow. I see by your speeches that you're very optimistic of the business conditions of the coming year. Boy, I don't blame you. If I had your dough, I'd be optimistic too. Will you please tell me what you all do with the vice president the bank has? I guess that's to get anybody more discouraged before you can be the main guy. Well, the United States is the biggest business institution in the world. They've only got one vice president. Nobody's ever found anything for him to do. I've met most of you as I come out of the stage door of the Follies every night. I want to tell you that any of you that are capitalized at under $1 million needn't hang around there. Our girls may not know their Latin and Greek, but they certainly know their Stone and Bradstreet. You have a wonderful organization. I understand you have 10,000 here, and with what you have in various federal prisons brings your membership up to around 30,000. So goodbye, paupers. You're the finest bunch of Shylocks that ever foreclosed a mortgage on a widow's home.
Will Rogers, of course, was always very critical of the do-nothing politicians in Washington, but something that a lot of the historians fail to mention, or the biographers fail to mention when they talk about Will Rogers, is that he was also the mayor of Beverly Hills, California. And he would have been the first person to tell you that as mayor of Beverly Hills, California, he himself was a do-nothing politician. And anyways, here is Will Rogers on his radio show talking about them do-nothing politicians and talking about how they call him a comedian, but he says that the do-nothing politicians are the greatest comedians of all. In fact, I like the end of the broadcast there, where he says, "My jokes don't hurt anybody. You can take them or leave them. But when Congress tells a joke, it becomes a law."
You know, last week I told you about the Rogers Giant Lottery Plan. Well, that's received endorsement. It's beyond any expectations that I possibly could think of. You know, there's bills in Congress now to carry on and legalize lotteries. And I received a wire this week from a congressman friend of mine who wants a copy of my plan to read into congressional record. Now, I feel pretty good about that. That's the highest praise that a humorist can have, is to get your stuff into congressional record. Just think, my name will be right in there alongside of Huey Long's and all those other big humorists. And you see, ordinarily, you got to work your way up as a humorist and first get into Congress. And then you work on up into the Senate, and then if your stuff is funny enough, it goes into the congressional record. But for an outsider to get in there as a humorist without having served his apprenticeship in either the House or the Senate, well, that's... I'm not bragging, but by golly, I feel pretty big about it. Did I ever tell you, I don't know whether I did or not, did I ever tell you about the first time I ever had any of my stuff in that daily? Well, I'd written some fool thing, and it pertained to the bill that they was arguing, or that they was kidding about, rather. So some senator read my little article, and anything that a senator reads goes into the record. So, well, another senator rose and said, you know, and as they always do, if you've ever seen them, "Does the gentleman yield?" They always say that, but they call each other gentlemen in there. But the tone that they put on the word, it would be more appropriate, you know, the way they can say gentleman, you know what I mean? It'll sound right if he come right out and says, "Does the coyote from Maine yield?" You know what I mean? That's about the way it sounds, you know. And then the man says, "I yield," you know, or if he don't, the other guy will keep on talking anyhow. And so the coyote from Maine says, "I yield to the polecat from Oregon." You know, well, anyhow, that's the way they do. They're very polite in there. And but I must get back to my story. When this senator read my offering, the other senator said, after all the yielding was all over, and the other senator said, he says, I object to the remarks of a professional joke maker being put into the congressional record. You know, meaning me, see? Taking a dig at me, see? See, they didn't want any outside fella contributing, and well, he had me wrong. Compared to them, I'm an amateur. and the thing about my jokes is they don't hurt anybody. You can take them or leave them. You know what I mean? But with Congress, every time they make a joke, it's a law. You know, and every time they make a law, it's a joke.
Welcome to the Christendom Curriculum. You know, every parent who decides to homeschool wants to secure a great education for their child, while also saving time and money. But these days, many parents have another concern. They also want a homeschool curriculum without all the multiculturalist, politically correct diversity doctrine that's really little more than a thin disguise for an anti-Christian, anti-American, and anti-Western civilization bias. Now there is such a curriculum. The Christendom Curriculum gives your children a complete education in Bible, history, literature, and more, focusing on the classic academic skills of reading, writing, and arithmetic. But we also tell the story of Christendom, the story of the Christian nations, especially as Christ's kingdom has been historically manifest in the nations of Europe and America, and we do so without apology. The Christendom Curriculum is the only Christian nationalist homeschool program you'll find. We support the right of the European and American peoples to their historic Christian cultures against the globalist leftists who want to destroy those cultures. Not only that, but we provide assigned reading courses for various hot-button subjects in our current culture wars, including feminism, social justice, and cultural Marxism, among others. These reading courses will teach your kids how to survive a social justice warrior attack, how to debate with leftists on social media, how to reform their local churches and communities, and more. We're living in a time of tremendous historical and social change. Christians have the opportunity now to begin building the culture and civilization of the next 1,000 years and beyond. It's an exciting time to be alive. So if you want to help raise the next generation of culture warriors, if you want your children to grow up with a love for Christ's kingdom and for their own nation, while at the same time learning how to defend America and rebuild the West, the easy-to-use Christendom Curriculum is for you. Click the Learn More button to get in on the action. And thanks for listening.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. This is Harry Von Zell speaking to you for the makers of that good stuff. And out on the coast, the one and only Will Rogers is watching for the signal that will bring Hollywood to New York. Now all the way to California. Ladies and gentlemen, Will Rogers and his famous alarm clock broadcasting from Los Angeles, California.
Thank you very much. We hear now earlier today, it seems kind of funny to be with everybody advised to spend and the government spending everything, and then it seems sort of funny for somebody to save a little daylight nowadays. Put a little of it on the budget or something. Do you remember my act on the radio last Sunday night? Well, even if you don't remember it, it don't matter very much. In fact, I about forgot it myself. But as well as I can remember it, I introduced a plan. It was a plan, it was a plan to end all plans. That's what it was. Well, it looks like it had the very opposite effect. This last week has been one of the biggest plan weeks I've known of in anything. It's the biggest plan week the country has suffered in years, this last week. And in fact, I think they could have named it Plan Week. Now, one of the big things that President Roosevelt made his original hit with was when he said, "If I'm wrong, I'll be the first to admit it." So when I say we should end all plans, it looks like I'm wrong and I'm the first to admit it. So it looks like we got to have plans, and I've really got to get busy on one. I won't give it to you today, but I'm going to dig one up. If you want a plan, brother, I can sure give you one now. I presented facts and figures to show you that plans didn't work. Now, I did that last Sunday, see? But do you think that discouraged the planners? No, not on your life. It just seemed to encourage them, look like. Right on top of my advice to not plan, well, it come a plan from Secretary Morgenthau, who's Secretary of the Treasury. Father used to be a ambassador to Turkey, and a fine old gentleman and a good friend of mine. But this Morgenthau, the young fella, very able man, he come out with a plan to put a bigger and better tax on these big estates, these tremendous big inheritance taxes, to be exact. That is men who died and on an estate of, say, $10 million, where the government takes about 90% of it, and then giving the offspring 10. And after Mr. Morgenthau gets through with him, and then on estates of 100 million and 200 million or a billion and like that, where the government just takes all of that and notifies the heir, says, your father died a pauper here today. Now, and he died a pauper here today, and he's being buried by it'll be the MEBA, the MABE, that's the Millionaires Emergency Burial Association. It's the kind of a branch of the RFC. Now, mind you, I've got to tell it all this. I don't hold any brief or any great grief either for a man that dies and leaves millions and hundreds of millions and a billion. I don't do that. But I don't believe Mr. Morgenthau's plan will work because he gives figures in there that shows what this new inheritance tax would bring in every year. He says, in 1936 we get so much, in 1930, all right along, see? And he gives these figures to show what it brings in every year. That is, as long as the Democrats stay in. And he seems to know just who's going to die each year and how much they go to leave. Now, brother, that's planning, ain't it, when you figure out that? Now suppose, for instance, he's got scheduled to die, J.P. Morgan. He's got him scheduled to die on a certain year. And you can bet they're taking range if they'll have him die while the Democrats are in, so they can get the benefit. So they get the benefit of that estate anyhow, see? Now, according to plans, J.P. Morgan, he's got to die in order for Mr. Morgenthau to reach his quota for that year. Now, while I think Mr. Morgan is a nice man, I never met him in much. At the time when he was on trial in Washington and he had the midget on his knee. And I met him there, but he's a very nice fellow, and very amiable, nice fellow. And I don't hear from him. It's very seldom, but I think his patriotism maybe would compare with some of the rest of us. But whether he be patriotic enough to want to die on this year's schedule or not, just to make Morgenthau's budget balance. I mean, that's asking a good deal of a man to just die right off, just so I can balance my budget. I mean, he might be rather unreasonable and not want to do it. As I say, old man is contrary, you know what I mean? And rich old men is awful contrary. They've had their own way so long that you can't. So in order for Mr. Morgenthau's plan to work out, I'd say for it to work out 100%, he's got to bump these wealthy guys off or something. Well, now that's the government's doing everything else, but there is a humane society. There was another big plan developed during the week. Did you read about Amy McPherson meeting Gandhi in India? Yes, Amy met Sister Amy. She had a date with the Mahatma over there. Yes, she had a date with him. It was what the French call rendezvous. Yeah, I'd like to add the talking movie rights to the conversation between Mahatma and Amy. I loved her. Heard what they said, you know. I think Mahatma wanted her to stay in India and help him with the untouchables, and Amy says, Brother Mahatma, you ought to come to Hollywood and, you know, and try to get near Garbo and meet some of our unapproachables. Well, and speaking of plans, I will say this for old Huey. He didn't break out with any, he didn't hatch any new plans during the week. He's just sitting on the same eggs he was. And now a little later on, also I want to tell you too, a little later on, the big batch, I think it's 7 o'clock our time out here. And I guess that makes about 4 hours difference today. It was 11 hours in the east, and well, you know what time it is. But tonight, later on, the President of our United States is going to be on the air. He hasn't spoken to us since last September. Well, he spoke to a lot of people, but not us. I mean, and he must have something important to say, because he don't just go shooting off every time he sees a microphone like these other candidates do. They can't pass a microphone without yowling in it. And I don't know what he's going to talk about. Maybe talk about Mae West. Everybody else is. In fact, I bet he'd rather talk about Mae than some of the things that he'll feel obliged to talk on tonight. You could explain Mae's husbands easier than they could the NRA, I'll bet. And you know, speaking of Mae, I bet there's nothing that would embarrass a successful person, you know, any more than having some old husband show up on you at the wrong time. Just when she thought she had him in Brooklyn, he showed up. And the President is liable to talk about catching fish off Astor's yacht. He's been around there, but I bet he don't talk on that. Well, he never did catch anything on that old tub. There's fish in the ocean, but that yacht gets theirs out of the fish market. They used to have photographers. Remember, they used to have photographers just did nothing but just follow our presidents around, just to get pictures of them when they fish, you know. Remember that? All around. They just catching fish. Even Mr. Coolidge used to drag in a little inoffensive little perch now and again, you know. Poor little fish, he'd drag him in just for the Sunday supplement, and Mr. Hoover would go out and hook some old mudcat for a hungry lamb sometimes. And but there's been 3 photographers starved to death during the Roosevelt administration, waiting for this Astor's yacht to approach even the crawdad anyway. They ought to put skis on that Astor yacht and go fur hunting. That's its racket. Much obliged. You remember your history, don't you? You remember how some of our big states were founded. He might talk about the bonus, the President might. He's kind of switched over on that, and he has a plan of paying it. I never saw as many schemes put forward, you know. They want to pay it for all of them. The soldiers want to receive it, but it's just the way. Everybody's got their own way and want to do it. And I don't know how they can have so many different schemes when it's paying the same bunch of men and the same bunch of money. Looks to me like they'll have to do with the bonus like we have to do with everything else now to get anybody to take it. They'll have to wrap it in cellophane. But he may speak on that, and I'll touch lightly on it because I don't interfere with anything that he would say. Mine is just a little preliminary introductory remarks to his. Of course, he's liable to touch on some of these new schemes to spend his $5 billion. You can't spend $5. Now that's something you got to have a plan for. You can't spend $5 billion in the old-fashioned way. I bet you couldn't put a strong man in a treasure warehouse full of $100 bills and give him a scoop shovel, and he couldn't shovel out that much money in the rest of his life, you know? We couldn't spell $1 billion, much less realize it, count it or anything, but we're a nation, we learn awful fast, and it won't be long now till we'll be working on the word trillion. Trillion, that's dollars, billion, and then trillion. You read in the paper, Congress has just been asked to appropriate $2 trillion to relieve the descendants of a race of people called Wall Streeters. The paper will go further on to say, this is a worthy cause, and no doubt this small appropriation will be made, as these are descendants of a once proud race, and after all, they're wards of the government. Then they got another plan. They figured out that what's the matter with this country is, I bet you couldn't guess it in a million years. They couldn't guess this plan. They figured out what's the matter with the country and going to spend $500 million on it. I bet you couldn't figure out what it is. Well, you know what it is? Well, it's that the people try to cross a railroad track without looking both ways. That's what it is. It's going to fix the grade crossings. That's what that is. Well, you say, the problem is to teach the people to look both ways. Drive up the track and look up and down and cross. Well, that's exactly what's the matter with us. Even when it don't apply to railroad trains. Everybody looked one way in 1928 and 29 around there. That's when the train hit all of us, remember? There wasn't a soul in the United States. It looked both ways then. But we certainly, and now we've gone to the other extreme. We're so scared now that we drive up to the track and we won't do anything. We're just standing there. We just stand there and look, and we won't cross the track at all. We even won't trust our own eyesight. If a train goes by and it looks like everything is okay and we might be able to cross, we won't do it. We're so scared that we think it might turn around, come back, and hit us again. That's what the president is liable to talk on. It's to try to get us to quit standing there looking and shaking and being scared that something's going to happen to us. He'll tell us it's the same track, you know, it is the same old track and the same, they've been crossing it for years, and all we have to do is just to use some judgment and carry on just as we have been for years, but we won't believe him. He's got to go to work, and now he's got to build a runway over the top of all these railroads, either over the top or under the bottom, and get that under there. To get that all down. Of course, I think it's a good plan. Mind you, I'm not against it. I think it's a fine plan. It'll give a lot of people work and do a lot of things, although I don't think it'll do everything that it's supposed to do. I don't think it'll save all the lives, because I think this grade crossing thing, you just rush right over the grade crossing and right on down to and get hit at the first intersection by a bus. That's what you'll do. That's one thing about buses. There's one thing about a bus is they're bigger than trains are now, and death is more sudden with a bus. When you get hit with that, there's no lingering illness with that at all. The buses come so much oftener than trains do, anyhow. You know, a lot of times people have had to wait pretty near a day to get hit by a train. It comes so seldom, but buses, there's so many of them where you can just get that pretty any time. And I bet you never did read, too, of a train ever hitting a car with just one person, just a driver, just one lone passenger, No, they just wait. Till the car gets loaded, and then they hit everybody, and then they do, wait a minute, I'm through here. Well, now, next Sunday, I'm going to try to dig you up. I'm going to have, if you want plans, brother, I've got one. Good time. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Tom Strain, Lieutenant Commander-in-Chief of the Sons of Confederate Veterans. The Confederate flag, Confederate symbols, and the reputation of our Confederate ancestors has come under attack. The Sons of Confederate Veterans is actively fending off our detractors, but there is only so much that we can do. We need your help. Contact your local, state, and national elected politicians and tell them that you will not tolerate these attacks on our heritage. You can also visit scv.org, download an application to join us in our fight to preserve our Southern heritage. Visit scv.org today. If you don't have a Confederate ancestor and you are tired of American history disappearing, you can assist us by becoming a friend of the SCV. Please visit scvheritagedefense.org and make a donation to the Heritage Defense Fund. We hope that you will join us in the fight to defend the Confederate soldiers' good name.
Last segment before the break, we played in its entirety one of Will Rogers' radio shows from the 1930s, kind of give you a feel of what it would have been like to have listened to Will Rogers on the radio. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share about a 3-minute clip with you from another Will Rogers radio broadcast. Given the fact that we're in the month of November and we're moving closer and closer to the holiday of Thanksgiving, this is Will Rogers' humorous commentary on the Pilgrim Fathers landing at Plymouth Rock.
Well, now, anyhow, on last Sabbath evening, I referred to the Pilgrims, our Pilgrims landing on Plymouth Rock. Well, boy, you ought to wait till I heard from New England. I split New England is wide open. It seems there's a town up there called Provincetown, and they have adopted a slogan which says, "Don't be misled by history or any other unreliable source. Here's the place where the Pilgrims landed." This is by unanimous vote of the Chamber of Commerce of Provincetown. Provincetown has been made the official landing place of the Pilgrims. Any Pilgrim landing in any other place was not official. If he landed on Plymouth Rock, it just served him right, that's all. Now, in the first place, I don't think that this argument I've created up there, it's terribly important. The argument that New England has got to settle in order to pacify the rest of America is why were they allowed to land anywhere? That's what that's what we ought to know. As a race, there's never been any comparison between a Pilgrim and an Indian. Now, I hope my Cherokee blood is not making me prejudiced. I want to be broad-minded. But I'm sure that it was only the extreme generosity of the Indians that allowed the Pilgrims to land. Suppose we reverse the case. You reckon the Pilgrims would ever let the Indians land? What a chance. What a chance. The Pilgrims wouldn't even allow the Indians to live after the Indians went to the trouble of letting them land. Well, anyhow, the Provincetown officials, they sent me a lot of official data that when the Pilgrims landed, they found some corn that the Indians had stored and that the Pilgrims were about starved and that they eat the Indians' corn. And they claimed that the corn was stored at Provincetown. So then you see the minute the Pilgrims landed, they got full of the corn and then they shot the Indians and perhaps because they hadn't stored more corn. I don't know. Of course, but they'd always pray. That's one thing about a Pilgrim. He would pray, mostly for more Indian corn. But you've never in your life seen a picture, I bet any one of you, you've never seen a picture of one of these old Pilgrims praying when he didn't have a gun right by the side of him. That was to see that he got what he was praying for.
And we are now out of time for this week's TBR Radio Presents, the TBR History Hour. I hope that you've enjoyed our tribute to Will Rogers and to a time when American politics was, shall we say, kinder and gentler. Of course, Will Rogers made fun of the do-nothing politicians. Let's just say that if Joe Biden manages to steal this election, he will be the epitome of a do-nothing politician. But at least in Will Rogers' day, when the politicians did nothing, they were truly doing nothing. I am deathly afraid of the nothing that Joe Biden and the Democrats are about to unleash on the United States of America. Anyways, I don't have time to comment on that right now because we are out of time. But I would like to encourage you to go to our website, www.barnesreview.org. Check out the Barnes Review. Check out our new coming November-December issue of TBR magazine. Anyways, I do have to go now, but I will be back again next week, same time, same place. Until then, God bless.